This is the Friday, February 9th meeting of the Friday Forum of the Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. And I'm Dave Clennon. I am your amiable facilitator. Anthony, I expect a lot of the usual wisdom, erudition, and humor, for which you're famed widely. And you better deliver this morning. Remember, erudition, wisdom, and humor. Take it away.
Well, thanks for that introduction, but I know I'm not going to live up to it, but I'll do my best. So this is Valentine's Day coming up very soon, and I thought I'd talk about love. Not the romantic kind, although I have nothing wrong with romance. I love to buy flowers for my wife and make her cards and all of that. But what I'd like to talk about this morning is the love that motivates me and others to be advocates for peace and justice. The Christian tradition distinguishes three different kinds of love: eros, erotic love; philia, friendship; and agape, spiritual love. Agape is what motivates us to make sacrifices for those we care about. As Jesus says in the Gospel of John, the greatest kind of love is laying down our lives for our friends. Jesus also tells us to love our enemies. This isn't easy, but it isn't impossible, and ultimately it's the approach that works best. Dr. King explains that loving your enemy doesn't mean having warm and fuzzy feelings towards a Ku Klux Klansman or white supremacists. It means treating them as you would like to be treated, with respect and as much kindness as you can muster. Such an approach can change hearts and minds and turn an enemy into a friend. When I first became a Quaker in 1980s, I was fearful that Reagan was leading us into a nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union. I didn't know what to do until I met a Quaker woman named Janet Riley, who was reaching out to the Russians and trying to create understanding through a joint book project. I became involved with this project and got to know and befriend Russians, and it changed my life. When we went to the Soviet Union, we carried postcards which had a quote from William Penn in Russian and English that said, "Let us try what love can do." We were part of the citizen diplomacy movement that encouraged Gorbachev and Reagan to meet and seek ways to reduce the threat of nuclear war. And these efforts were successful. The Cold War ended without bloodshed, and a process was put in place that reduced nuclear weapon stockpiles by over 50%. After 9/11, I also felt fearful. I was afraid that we were going to be led into a worldwide war against terrorism that would have dire consequences both at home and abroad. As I prayed, a phrase from the gospel came to mind: perfect love drives out fear, 1 John 4:18. I took this to heart and was led to reach out to my Muslim neighbors and get to know them. Little by little, I was led into the interfaith peace movement and to groups like ICUJP. I feel that the interfaith peace movement has had a significant impact and is being tested once again. After the brutal attack of October 7th and its horrific aftermath, I asked myself the question: how do I put my Christian commitment to love and my Quaker commitment to peace into practice? How do we respond collectively as peacemakers? I think the first step is empathy. Take time to reflect and pray for the victims of war who've lost their lives, their homes, and their hopes for the future. We can also pray for the perpetrators and enablers of violence who've lost their humanity by dehumanizing others. We can pray that our leaders and on both sides of the conflict will take off their blinders and see that violence only begets more violence. And as we pray, we may be led to take further action. As James said, faith without works is dead. So here's some actions that I practiced and recommend. First, write to our elected officials. Let them know we want a ceasefire, de-escalation of violence, etc. I recommend going to the website of Friends Committee on Legislation that has great templates for writing to elected officials. That's fcnl.org. We can take part in interfaith prayer vigil like the one that takes place every Monday from 5 to 7 in front of Representative Tootie Choo's office here in Pasadena. Again, we're calling for a ceasefire and end to the occupation. And this vigil is being organized by a grassroots collective that includes the Pasadena Mennonites, All Saints Episcopal, Jewish Voice for Peace, SoCal Islamic Center, the PCC Anti-War Group, and others. Our gatherings always end with a powerful prayer. We can join an interfaith study group like the one that meets monthly here in Pasadena, sponsored by the Islamic Center of Southern California, the Pasadena Jewish Center Temple, and All Saints Church. On January 21st, I attended a session called Bearing Witness Through Compassionate Listening. Two skilled facilitators from New Ground, a Muslim woman and a rabbi, led us through a compassionate listening exercise that enabled us to share our feelings about what's happening in Israel-Palestine so that we could build trust and understanding and hopefully take meaningful action. We can also reach out to our Jewish and Muslim neighbors and friends and be compassionate listeners. Many are experiencing grief, fear, anger, and despair, and they need to know that we care. And finally, we can reach out to our Muslim neighbors during Ramadan. I'm helping to plan an event at the First United Methodist Church here in Pasadena, where a group of Muslims gather for worship each Friday. We plan to have a time of fellowship and an iftar sometime in March. So these are just a few of the ways that we can put our faith and our love into action during these challenging times. I'm confident that we at ICUJP will continue to find ways to be instruments of healing, justice, and peace. Thank you.
I'm speechless. I want to think about your reflection before I put my 2 cents worth in. I'm not going to put my 2 cents worth in. I'm going to.
Thank you, Dave, for facilitating us. I'm really proud to introduce our two guests today. Diedra Robinson is a Latine Jewish activist and Alabama native. Maybe we'll hear more about that. With over 20 years experience as an educator and trainer in public, private, and professional sectors. Her bio says she has a passion for history, language, and ancestry, which we heard a little about, with a focus on the intersection of European colonialism and Mexican Jewish identity. In her volunteer work with IfNotNow Los Angeles, which we'll hear a lot about today, she's helped facilitate a dedicated environment for Black, Indigenous, Jews of color, Sephardi, and Mizrahi individuals, in addition to diversifying traditionally white spaces. She regularly speaks about anti-Semitism and Christian hegemony in both religious and secular arenas. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from her. We're joined again by Matthew Hom, who wears at least 3 activist hats that I'm aware of, and probably several others. He's a Jewish labor, immigration, and housing justice and racial justice organizer with Chinese and Ashkenazi roots, who aspires to help build diverse, multiracial, and interfaith coalitions for justice throughout Southern California. And he pursues that work as the faith-rooted organizer in LA and Santa Monica for CLUE, our good friends at Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. I don't know which one of you is going first, but please take it away.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share. Okie dokie. So today we're going to be talking about Jewish solidarity and the diversity therein, and how we can help organize together for ceasefire, which is just the first of many steps in our work. All right, so who is IfNotNow? For those of you who may not be familiar with us, IfNotNow is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, cross-class movement of American Jews, and we are organizing our community to end U.S. support for Israel's apartheid system and demand equality, justice, and a thriving future for all Palestinians and Israelis. We're fighting for a vision of Jewish liberation, which recognizes that our safety is intertwined with the safety of all others, including and especially Palestinians. And our name comes from a famous excerpt of the Talmud, and it is a quote from Rabbi Hillel, who says, "If I'm not for myself, who is for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when?" During the violence in 2014, a lot of young Jews who were angered by the hawkish response of our American leaders and our Jewish institutions came together under the banner of IfNotNow to demonstrate their resistance through the beauty of Jewish ritual. And moved by their moral anguish and inspired by these questions from Rabbi Hillel, they organized actions in nearly a dozen cities and across the country to honor both the loss of life from Israelis and Palestinians. And they had 3 key demands. Number 1, stop the war on Gaza. Number 2, end the occupation. And 3, freedom and dignity for all. We've been told for decades that this occupation, the blockade of Gaza, and apartheid are necessary to keep Israelis safe, but it has never been clearer that the opposite is in fact true. The occupation has not ensured Jewish safety, and it never will. Both Jews and Palestinians continue to pay for this falsehood with their lives, as we have seen. Only peace, justice, and equality can ensure safety and a thriving future. We're grounded in the belief that the only way forward is through partnership between Jews and Palestinians, and that our Jewish pain cannot be used to justify any more violence. What Israel's doing right now, funded by US dollars, is horrifying, and it is making Jews worldwide less safe. Anti-Semitic violence, anti-Palestinian violence, Islamophobia, all of these have increased since October 7th. Nothing justifies this violence. Nothing justifies this targeting and dehumanization. So we're making a narrative shift. Jewish safety and Palestinian safety are interdependent, and real safety only comes through co-liberation of our people, both of our people, all of our people, and our fates are inextricably bound together. So it may seem a little bit unorthodox that we are just now getting to the proper introductions, but we needed to give you a little bit of context about the umbrella of IfNotNow before we give you a little bit of insight into who Matthew and I are and why we specifically are helping organize with IfNotNow right now at this time. So there's a little map here. There's a few lines on there to kind of give you a broad idea of where some of our ancestors are from. And as you can see, it's pretty global. Matthew will talk a little bit about his family history. My ancestors came from Mexico and the Iberian Peninsula. So colonization is something that's very present in my mind, and how that shapes our identities and how that impacts our liberation. Those are very close to my heart. And my background growing up in Alabama, the buckle of the Bible Belt, racism and the both successes and failures to address systemic inequality have always been at the forefront of my life growing up. And there's many times where you can visit the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham. You can learn about the history of the Selma March. You can learn about the Black Belt and the fertile soil there. But there comes a time where you have to really acknowledge that facts are only part of the journey. You have to connect with people who are being marginalized. You have to speak up for them and use whatever leverage and privilege and space that you have to advocate for the people who may not have that same power. So when I got to that stage of my life which I wish had been much earlier than it was, I realized, hey, not only do I experience marginalization in certain areas due to my ethnicity, but there are other people that I can advocate for who have different backgrounds. And I have been so honored to meet and connect with leaders, with historians. I've met freedom writers. I've gotten to meet so many people in so many different phases of our movements, both civil rights and otherwise. And it's been a really enriching journey. It's been a humbling journey because I've learned to recognize and unpack the sorts of things that contribute to these inequalities. And I have found my way to If Not Now through a combination of all those those different factors. So before we keep going, I will let Matthew talk a little bit about his history.
Thank you so much, Diedra. I'm so honored to be here and be part of this conversation with you all about If Not Now, the work we're doing, and our commitment to racial justice as part of a broader movement for justice for all people. So my ancestors come from a variety of different places. On one hand, on my father's side, we are Chinese Americans, and my family comes from a place called Toisan, which is in Guangdong province. It's a rural area where people farm rice, but it's very significant in American history because from about the 1850s through the 1950s, if you're thinking about people, Chinese who came to build the railroads and built the Chinatowns and were marginalized by the Chinese Exclusion Act, that was mostly, almost entirely people from this part of China near Macau and Hong Kong. And that's where my people come from. Part of that is a story of immigration, but also racial marginalization and needing to find ways to resist exclusionary and racist policies in this country, the United States. So even my last name, Ham, is a testament to that my grandfather was what's called a paper son. He had to buy a fake identity from a Chinese person already in the US in order to get into the country. But really our surname is something else. It's Chin or Chan. And so telling these stories, I connect very clearly with my mother's side of family history. So I am white Ashkenazi Jewish, and my ancestors come from lots of different places, which today we would say are Poland, Hungary, and Ukraine. But back in the 1800s, when they left for the US, were Russia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire. And of course, these people came in the 1850s to the 1880s, seeking refuge from pogroms and from anti-Jewish violence, but thinking about these like legacies of borders and imperialism and colonialism and how that affects me and my story that then goes deeper in terms of my family history in the US. Living in my family history, ancestors lived in different places, but then even in LA, a lot of connections to like Boyle Heights and places like that, and how I feel deeply rooted in the struggles of those communities. Being able to tell these stories in like both sides of my family about a commitment to liberation for all people that both includes like a lot of grappling with complicity and entanglement in like oppressive systems like white supremacy and capitalism, but also really inspiring stories of resistance. And so I have become a social justice organizer, a community organizer. For my day job, I organize for labor justice, for worker justice and racial justice, for housing. And that's why I'm so honored also as a volunteer to be working with If Not Now. My Jewish identity is rooted in like not only a sense of justice from the othering of the Jewish people across history, but also a commitment that everyone should be free, everyone should have liberation, and especially that our Jewish trauma and pain should not be weaponized to harm in other people. And even in my Chinese family history, its entanglement with things like imperialism and colonialism, like I see the connections and I resonate with the connections that other people in those communities are making to Palestine solidarity. And for me, with all these identities as being my whole self and not just half of this, half that, which is, in my perspective, the wrong way to put it. I really resonate, and that's why even with all the organizing I have going on, I'm so honored to be part of the team, the part of the volunteer team at IfNotNow, and help us organize and reach out to community partners and other organizations and collaborators across Southern California to really be a really vibrant and impactful movement in this moment for ceasefire and going forward for liberation for Palestinians and for all people. And I'll turn it over back to Diedra.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, the idea of identity is such a complicated one because we are our ancestors. We are all of the places that they've lived. And sometimes those are very clear to us, and sometimes they're obscured by violence or other pieces of history, like, for instance, the Inquisition. So a lot of Jews left the Iberian Peninsula when they could at the expulsion decree in 1492. Some of them were able to escape to safer locations. Some of them were forced to convert. And that is only one chapter of the kind of unfortunate story of Iberian Jewish identity, but it gets better over time. All right, to circle back to where we were, we had initially told you about the foundations of IfNotNow in 2014, but it wasn't quite enough. We realized if the movement was to succeed, it needed to expand. It could not be just young Jews. It couldn't just be economically privileged Jews. It couldn't just be Jews with only one regional background. IfNotNow needed Jews of all ages. It needed Jews from the working class. It needed Jews with ancestry from all across the diaspora, as well as those still in the land. It needed all Jews. So the movement relaunched last year with a much broader scope and a focus on that diversity and enriching the people that are composing the base. And our strength is in our diversity, and it's the only sure path forward for us to succeed. Since October 7th, over 28,000 Palestinians have been killed, and the number of casualties continues to climb. The vast majority of over 130 Israeli hostages remain in captivity, and their families have been largely ignored by the Israeli government for any really actionable measures to bring them home. And IfNotNow, in the midst of all this, has helped lead more than 100 actions, from sit-ins and mourning events to marches and civil disruptions. And there's a very small selection of photos from some of the hostages, and then there's photos around that of our actions that we've helped to foster community and help people channel some of their grief. There are some things here that we have done in LA. I won't spend a whole lot of time on them, but we've been in and out of the news. We have been demanding for our leaders to be brave and courageous and take a step up for humanity. We have gathered together to mourn Israeli lives and Palestinian lives that have been lost due to this violence. And we've expanded our network. We've made new friends, new family. We've held cultural events. We've had concerts and screenings and documentaries, and we're here and we are not going anywhere. We've been building our community, and these are just some of the many groups that we have been able to foster connections and solidarity with, because we can't do this alone. We need each other as much as the movement needs us. So some of these groups have co-sponsored events with us. They have participated, they have spoken. Some, like the Islamic Center of Southern California, have actually been so gracious as to host events for us when some of our own community wouldn't open their doors. So we're so grateful to know all of these people and all of these organizations, because it's only through these coalitions and it's only by connecting to one another that we'll be able to succeed in this movement. We do have some challenges, content warning for some of the screenshots on here. We have challenges. Obviously, the anti-Semitism continues, and there's been a uptick in people trying to weaponize that. They've been trying to launder their anti-Semitism under a guise of being pro-Palestinian. We're still dealing with Christian nationalists. We're dealing with white supremacy. We're still trying to tackle the idea that the state of Israel represents all Jews worldwide. That idea harms Palestinians directly. It also harms Jews in the diaspora as well. But a lot of these issues, they're not the only root problem. They tend to distract us also from things like racism and systemic discrimination and economic exploitation, and they work together to achieve those things. The far-right actors on social media, unfortunately, it's one of those, it feels like whack-a-mole sometimes. As soon as you expose one bad faith actor, it seems like two or more pop up. But pro tips here, there's a lot of accounts that spring up near or after October, and they tend to only follow people in the far right. They post a lot of dog whistles, conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic tropes, and their material largely isn't pro-Palestine so much as it's criticizing Jews broadly or even the state of Israel singularly. So if you notice those things, you can investigate a little further to make sure that somebody's acting in good faith. And there's a tweet here from another account. This tweet was deleted fairly quickly because the point wasn't to put outright Holocaust denial in the public sphere. It was to activate people on the right. And obviously this was called out swiftly. They deleted it, but this account is one of those bad faith actors, we'll say. So Christian nationalism, again, I apologize for the aggressive language in the screenshot, but these are things that unfortunately persist. There are narratives in Christian texts that tend to undergird these ideas. Jews tend to be seen as the perpetual other in society, and our practices tend to be seen as a threat to kind of the Christian society or the hegemony that we live under. There are, tropes that continue to persist to this day. Some of them have been going since the medieval period, like blood libel, well poisoning, deicide. Those are all things that we are largely aware of, but that tend to not be fully rooted out yet. So Christian nationalist groups also use these tropes to cheer on the violence because their particular theology requires violence before their end times will occur. So we tend to just be cannon fodder in their stories. So seeing the humanity of people rather than characters in a story is one of the ways that we can undo this. White nationalism, things like Patriot Front and Identity Europa, a lot of these groups are still trying to mobilize, and they lean on a lot of anti-Semitic tropes. Jews are, simultaneously the puppet masters, but also weak and passive, and this contradiction of ideas allows people to blame us for things that are actually actually due to systemic issues like capitalism. So people tend to go for an easier explanation, and it's like, oh, Jews are right there, let's blame them, when it's not Jews. It's a larger system that's being perpetuated that is negatively impacting all of us. Israel, so this is the kind of central topic. Most of us in the American Jewish sphere, through our day schools, our institutions, we've been taught repeatedly that Zionism is a thing, and it's, the self-determination in our ancestral homeland, and that we have a unique claim to, Palestine or the land of Israel. And it's a noble idea to have a land that is safe for us. We do want safety. We want to be Jewish without fear of being persecuted. But the reality on the ground is that our safety has been coming at the expense of the Palestinian lives. It's been perpetuated through a system of apartheid and violent occupation, and it's been going on since approximately 1948, but even before. Palestinians are being daily brutalized by settlers and the Israeli military, and aren't even able to control resources of their own, like electricity or water. And through a convoluted system of blockades and checkpoints. Travel is severely limited, and as you may have seen, there are right-wing nationalists who are blocking aid trucks to come into the land and try to get medicine and fuel and food to people in Gaza. So this is all being done under what is supposed to be security, but even within the borders of Israel, it's not a land of equality for all the people there. So when we're looking at these injustices, we have to remember that Israel, it's not acting as a local Jewish communal body or a local, panel. It's acting as a state. And as a state, it is capable both of benevolence and atrocity. And this recent article in Slate by Emily Tompkin did a fantastic job of articulating the difference between the idea of Israel as a state and not a synagogue. And when we criticize Israel, we are criticizing a state. We're not criticizing a people. And Israel prefers to weaponize that, to say that they are above criticism or that they are incapable of doing horrific things, but all states are capable of both the good and the evil. So we have to make sure that we are criticizing the actions of a state, and we can do that, and we should do that. We can do that without, perpetuating the anti-Semitic tropes that have endangered us. So we're going to pivot over to Matthew, who's going to speak a little bit more about that. So I will pass the mic.
Thank you so much, Diedra. And I know, like, we're sharing these challenges that the Jewish left is facing in its work. Of course, naming the just atrocious conditions that Palestinians are facing right now. IfNotNow has this really unique and special strategy and positionality that we organize our own community to shift communal support and to shift our national US support for these things that we find oppressive. And so from my perspective, we're sharing these challenges, and the sort of silver lining is all the more so are the incredible actions we're doing, the incredible solidarity we're building, the incredible partnerships we're doing. All the more so are those meaningful, given these challenges, the way we've been able to show up, of course, in deep solidarity with Palestinians and Arab folks and Muslims and folks from throughout our communities here in Southern California. So the Jewish left and how it fits into the Jewish community is like a big topic, something that a lot of us think a lot about. And a great way it's going to be in the resources document we're going to share with you at the end, but if anyone hasn't watched, for example, the film Israelism, one of the two main subjects of which was one of the co-founders of IfNotNow, Simone Zimmerman, I just really recommend it. You can rent it for $5, and the link is in the resources doc I'll be sending. But it really shows just the way that Israel is treated in sort of the Jewish education of many Jews as were raised in the Jewish community, and the different journeys that a lot of Jews have gone through in order to reach a place of solidarity and action with Palestinians. And so just broadly, a lot of folks who, both white Jews and will introduce the term Bajoksim, Jews of color and Sephardim and Mizrahim, a lot of Jews who have strived to be in solidarity with Palestinians have just anecdotally, by their own testimony, doesn't apply the same to every single person, but many have faced isolation from families, from Jewish communal institutions, marginalizations, and sort of erasures of identity, like being told you're not a Jew, you're a bad Jew, much worse things. And of course, this causes a lot of trauma that is magnified by the trauma that we as Jews also feel in co-empathy with other Jews, even other Jews who we differ politically, because we also suffer from anti-Semitism. We also care about Jewish peoplehood. We also care about the safety and thriving of the Jewish people. And so to have those traumas that all Jews face, and then a lot of this also marginalization from taking a stance of solidarity with Palestine is is very hard for folks and is very identity forming for folks, just to speak very generally. And when I'm going to now turn into sharing a little bit about the leadership of BIJOXM folks within IfNotNow, all of this we just shared is all the more so why our commitment to racial justice and to uplifting the leadership of Jews of color and BIJOXM folks is so important. So I'm going to introduce this term, which is related to other terms that you might have heard, like Jews of color. Technically, Jews of color is within BIJOXM, because BIJOXM encapsulates a lot of different Jews, a lot of different folks who have different identities. And so it's not one identity, and there's never one person or one organization or group that could speak for all of them. But there is some utility, there is some benefit in speaking of BIJOXM folks within the Jewish community or within like the Jewish left, or IfNotNow, in relation to their non-whiteness or their complex relationships with whiteness, right? So BIJOXM stands for Black Jews and or Indigenous Jews and or Jews of color, which can mean lots of things, but it often includes Latino Jews and Asian American Jews and more, and also Sephardim and Mizrahim. And these are historical terms which not everyone even likes from within the community. So, but just in generally, Sephardim come from the Iberian Peninsula and the diaspora from the Iberian Peninsula after the expulsions of the 1490s. And Mizrahim are often described as Jews who lived in Arab lands in the medieval era and in early modern period. So this is a term that encapsulates such diverse identities, and so it's really important to share that like this is not one identity. This is like so diverse, and no one can speak for all of them. But it's really useful not only to have affinity spaces within the Jewish community, but even within our Jewish left organizing that allows people to really show up in their identities. And next slide, please. Okay, so BIJOXM are so many diverse kinds of people. And as I shared, they're not just all one thing, and especially in our relationship to race in the American and global contexts. This diversity is also represented in the varieties of racial identities. So the racial diversity is not just like Black folks and Latino folks and Asian folks. It's also on this other way of thinking. It includes folks from non-white Jewish communities, historic non-white Jewish communities, like Jews who lived in India or Jews who lived in China, for example. It also includes biracial folks like me, so white Jewish and from a non-Jewish family of color. It also includes transracial adoptees. It also includes converts and so much more. So no one person or group can speak for all of BIJOXM folks, and each BIJOXM Jew represents their own authentic identities. It's not like you're half this or half that. Like you're all of your identities, racial and otherwise, and you're also Jewish and Jewish nonstop, right? Without condition, without qualification, right? So despite the fact that more than 15% of the American Jewish community is Jews of color, which again is a subset within BIJOXM, so BIJOXM would be even more. Many have been often minimized and erased both within the Jewish community and also outside of the Jewish community, to the extent in which outside of the Jewish community, Jews are sometimes read as exclusively white. Many Sephardim and Mizrahim have experienced marginalization in both America and also in other diaspora communities, and also in Israel, as Diedra mentioned. Next slide. So Jews of Color Initiative did a really powerful study, which is in the resources that we'll send, called Beyond the Count: Perspectives and Lived Experiences of Jews of Color. And I was actually a respondent in the survey, and 80% of those surveyed agreed that they experienced some sort of like discrimination in Jewish settings. And of course, there's so much more to say about that, testimonials that people could offer, but just to name that as a phenomenon. But another element is very important. By Jackson, folks experience racism and othering based on their racial identities, or they may experience that. But they're also Jews. Their Jewishness is not qualified or like minimized, right? They're also Jews, which means just like all other Jews were impacted by anti-Semitism, as well as the same political and social dynamics within and outside of the Jewish community that white Jews who are also involved in liberation work also face. Like a few slides ago, we're talking about the marginalization that folks who try to be in solidarity with Palestine often face. And white Jews who want to be in solidarity with Palestine often face this marginalization. And so, not in any comparative way, but certainly also by Jackson folks who also are in solidarity with Palestine are at risk of facing marginalization, right? And that is why, just to bring it to like the point, that is why IfNotNow really aspires, and I'm so proud of it, to uplift the leadership and perspectives and voices of Jackson members of our movement. And we've done this in just numerous incredible ways. And also commit ourselves to solidarity with the movements for racial justice in the places where we live, like here in Southern California. So not only to build racial justice internally in our space as we fight for Palestinian liberation, but also to be part of the movements for racial justice and economic justice here in Southern California. And there's so many ways I could share that we're doing that. But one last thing is a thought about when people talk about relationships between Jews, quote unquote Jews, and a racial group. And folks might have seen a New York Times Magazine piece that highlighted Eva Borgward, IfNotNow's amazing spokesperson who's been involved in both Palestine liberation work and also racial justice work. And also one of her movement partners, Nicole Carty, who is a Black organizer and movement leader. And on one hand, it was a really cool piece. It was really comprehensive. It really gave so much voice to Eva and to Nicole to really share their stories and their perspectives on solidarity between Black folks and Jewish folks. And then it sort of went into a little history. Next slide, please. But one thing to note is that it didn't name Black Jews. It didn't like name Black Jews or like interview Black Jews. And that's something that was missing. So the histories and struggles and partnerships and difficulties and collaborations and interrelations between Jews and other minorities and marginalized groups, lots of people have written about it, talked about it, thought about it, could share a long reading list, I'm sure. For example, that piece, which I think is good that it's out there. I think everyone should read it, even though I'm offering this intervention as well. The intervention we want to share with you this morning, or in addition to what we've already shared, is that too often conversations equate Jews, quote unquote Jews, with white Jews. And they often neglect or erase folks whose identities are at the intersections of Jewishness and racialization, who also struggle with anti-Semitism and racism. For example, in this case, Black Jews. And of course, neither Diedra nor I are a Black Jew. So we are also being intentional that we cannot speak for Black Jews, but we can uplift their voices, as we're going to do in the resources we're going to share, and just to give this folks the idea that when you think of Jews, you should think of this multiracial community, all the more so on the Jewish left, all the more so in the Jewish community that's fighting for justice and for Palestinian liberation. And that's just a really important perspective, and we're really glad to be able to share that today. So the Jewish left, of which IfNotNow is an integral member, is rooted in a commitment to anti-racism, as well as Palestinian and Jewish liberations, in large part by uplifting the voices of Jackson people in our movement and our diverse and intersectional histories and our lived experiences. And I think I can speak for Diedra as well as for myself in saying that we're so proud and honored to be part of it. Next slide.
Agreed.
Okay, so we're closing out and looking forward to the Q&A. I'm going to now put in the chat, instead of trying to paste all these long things into the chat as separate things that you'd have to copy, I have a doc, this bit.ly link, ICUJP INN Feb 24. And we included there both 6 different resources to check out. And it was just hard to pick these because there's so much good stuff. But uh, Jewish left reflection and Jewish currents, something in the nation about the resurgence of the Jewish left in this moment, the link to Rent Israelism, as well as Democracy Now! Interview with Simone Zimmerman and one of the filmmakers of Israelism. And I also included the Beyond the Count survey, Beyond the Count study by Jews of Color Initiative. And we're talking about uplifting the voices of Black Jews. You'll find the link there to the Black Jewish Liberation Collective, of which I know many of their members. They're so awesome. These are Black Jewish folks who are involved in organizing and liberation movements. And many of them are just so vocal as part of these movements and on these issues. And I just cannot more encourage to check them out. And then as part of that, number 6 was interview with one of their members, Shoshana Brown, who did a video interview a few weeks ago called Black Jewish Alliance, Radical Organizing at the Intersection of Blackness and Jewishness. And also at the bottom of that page, we have some next steps and opportunities for If Not Now. There's an intake form, so I can also paste these in the chat now. If you'd like to get involved in our chapter, there's a form to fill out, which is used for all the chapters, but where it says your location, you put Los Angeles, that's number 1. And you can also sign up for an If Not Now event. And I'm putting the link to sign up for that as well. And then the last thing, we of course know that we need resources to continue this work and to sustain this incredible movement. So we welcome folks to contribute, and you can do that by becoming a member for Jewish folks, because we do define ourselves primarily as a movement of Jews organizing our community. And also, if you're not Jewish, we invite you to become an ally and to contribute that way as well. So I know now it's the time probably to transition to the Q&A. So I'm really honored on behalf of Diedra and myself to be with you and to be able to share this perspective on Jewish solidarity, if not now, and racial justice and by Joxum leadership. And I'm glad to turn it over.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a like a stereotype, to put more of a human face on the ask there for supporting our organization. The dues fund a lot of our work in ways that, a typical organization would be funded, but it also enables a lot of the working class Jews, of which I'm a part, the ability to participate in a lot of these events. Transportation can be a challenge, distance can be a challenge, a lot of things that we don't normally think about as resources can be a financial barrier, and allies and other people who are able to sustain this movement financially, it greatly helps. If it weren't for some of those sustainers, I wouldn't be able to participate and do some of the work that I've been able to do. So, all right, looks like we have some questions. So,
folks, thank you very much. This was really comprehensive. This was really well done, and I'm glad of the work that you guys are doing. And I wanted to see, it seems like both of you have been involved with the organization for a while. And I know that for a lot of organizations that are on, where the membership is on either side of this conflict, the polarization that they have had to deal with has become much more pronounced over the last, obviously since October. But have you found that that there have been avenues for you to be able to reach out to maybe people on, that have a more Zionist view of the perspective of how Israel and Palestine is in this conflict?
So our organization is a very big tent, and we want people involved who may have a wide range of relationships to Israel as a state, as Zionism as a concept. We'd don't ask them to pick any one label before they join us. If they are morally activated and realize that, hey, the occupation is causing harm, that the two-tiered system of justice is unfair, if they're activated, we welcome them in with open arms. Lots of people, there's so many different places for people to be on that journey, and we welcome them no matter where they are on that journey. And that open door, that big tent, is what allows us to welcome in so many Jews who may have been afraid to speak up before. Maybe they knew that things weren't right, but they weren't sure how to put words around it, or maybe they were afraid to speak up for fear of, being isolated or condemned. So we welcome all of those people no matter where they are. And we try to stay as welcoming as we can, because we know it can be intimidating, and we want those people to feel confident.
Thank you. Rick, do you want to follow up or expand on Deidra's answer?
No, I think that's great. Just to let you know too, as I do the YouTube video for this, that sheet that you did is going to be very helpful for me to put these links in, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Rick. Steve Rohde is next on the list, and I'm on there too. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you, guys. Just a wonderful presentation. I learned so much today. 2 questions for now. The defenders of Israel today are very outraged that there's an accusation that Israel was founded by white colonizers. And I wanted to get a sense from both of you of how you take both the accusation and the response to that accusation historically and currently. So I'll just put that question out first.
Matthew, you want to do that one first?
Sure. So thank you so much, Stephen. So I think this goes to all the sort of tricky dynamics that we've shared that folks in the Jewish left have faced. I think there's lots of stuff going on, right? There's such heightened emotions, and just all humans often we search for systems and ways of understanding that help us understand really complex things, although not using complexity as a way to minimize an oppression that's clearly going on, right? But so I think, as for If Not Now, I think Diedra just shared really well that we're really open for folks who have different opinions on probably that question, or the statehood of Israel as well as Zionism itself. But I think we're aligned with these broader justice movements who are naming this apartheid system and this oppression and the occupation that's going on in Israel Palestine. So whether American racialization is the best analogy or not, I'm sympathetic towards it more. But whether it is or not, we're clearly can still express that there is this unequal, unjust system going on in Israel, and that did exist at its founding. That, if not now, we do acknowledge that the Nakba and that the system's been going on 75 years, and telling that truth does not have to minimize or erase or be imbalanced in any way to all the history and the trauma of Jewish suffering, Jewish oppression, Jewish persecution. We're actually trying to uplift this way of thinking about mutual liberation that can name all these truths together and not pit them against each other. And I'll say also that one last thing is that it's just that there's a lot of fear. So a lot of the folks who are really triggered by those analogies or by those frameworks are just really in a lot of fear that is justified, is understandable, by their own experiences or by Jewish history. But we know that both the fear itself and the way that it's weaponized by folks who have something to gain from it is not serving us. It doesn't give us safety, whether it's Israelis or Jews in the diaspora. And this is the vision we're trying to build. Thank you.
Yeah, and the issue of Israel, it's so tempting to flatten it down into, oh, it's just whiteness, it's just colonialization, it's just one thing. It's not. It's a puzzle piece, and it's built of many different elements. The reality of the Holocaust plays in. The reality of diaspora plays in. The reality of racialization plays in. There are things that we can acknowledge without minimizing the other elements. So you can read the history of, Herzl and the idea of a Jewish state. You can read about how he wrote to, the founder of Rhodesia and go, hey, bro, how do you got some advice about how to form a state? Those are all things that you can read about. It doesn't negate or minimize the actual oppression and suffering that Jews were experiencing prior to, the end of World War II. And the violence that was enacted by Hamas on 10/7 doesn't negate the very real anti-Semitism that's being experienced by Jews now. It also doesn't justify the violence that the Israeli military or the settlers are enacting on Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. So these issues, because they're complex, obviously we don't have enough time to get into all of them, but we acknowledge the lived history of our people and the people of Palestine, as well as acknowledging, hey, we're all hurting and we've all experienced horrific things, and we can take a different path forward. We can choose to work through these issues together and unpack these trauma responses so that we're not reacting out of fear, so that when we hear someone call out for justice, that it's not perceived as a threat. And we can call for justice without phrasing it or packaging it in a way that makes Jews feel like they're being accused for a number of evils. So it's a lot. It's a lot, and it really is unfortunate that we're having to work a lot of these issues out in the public sphere, because we deal enough with them in our own communities. But I'm thankful for that question, because it brings us back to our shared humanity. It brings us back to the systems that we've experienced as a collective and how we can work past it.
Because you both, studied these issues, and that's how we benefit from these programs. What is and is not true about the claim that Zionism was a white colonial movement? I mean, historically, beginning in the 19th century, Zionism was discussed and explored. By the 20th century, it was a movement of American and European Jews largely, so that when you establish a Jewish state in 1948, is it superficial to say that was white colonialism, or
child?
or is it really
the 19th century colonial era? It was a lot of things, and it was part what we think of as whiteness. It was part what we now call colonization and imperialistic things. Those were factors. They weren't the only ones. Again, it's hard to simplify it down to just, hey, yes or no, is this white colonialism? Mostly yes, but also there's other things going on. Zionism, especially like in the early writings of Theodor Herzl, acknowledged that anti-Semitism is a thing that's happening in a lot of Europe, and because it's happening and we don't see it ending, we need a place to go where we don't have to experience that daily. Which, hey, legit, I get it. We definitely should not be experiencing anti-Semitism. That would be great. The answer to that may not necessarily need to be an isolated Jewish state by itself to the exclusion of other people. Those are conversations that have been happening since Herzl put out the Jewish state, his early writings. People were arguing then, is this the necessary solution? People are arguing about it now. So colonialism and whiteness do play a part. It's just not the only part. And, you know, the earlier movements, like the World Zionist Congress and things like that, these discussions were had. Dissenters are on record as saying, hey, maybe we should do this differently, or maybe we should not do it at all. And when people discuss it now, our framework is so much more broad because we have the benefit of looking back at, 200, 300, 400 years of empire and going, hey, the way that we think of race now is different than the way they thought of race, or the way that we identify ourselves has changed. So yes, that's part of it. It's not the only part. So acknowledging that is a big first step, but also acknowledging how that idea is weaponized is also another really, really important step.
My question is, I noticed that IfNotNow has a lot of community partners with Arab groups, and I'm wondering if you're doing any lobbying with you mentioned local city councils, but maybe the board of supervisors too, because I noticed that Jewish Federation LA, they have been appearing at a lot of the board hearings and commenting about the rising anti-Semitism. And some of their press releases on what's going on are very misleading, and I feel like they're dehumanizing Palestinians. And so when they're appearing at these board hearings and talking about rising anti-Semitism, there's no questioning of it, and there's not the other side, the voices for the Palestinians or the Arabs. So I'm wondering if you have any insight into that and how we can bring those Arab and Palestinian voices into these issues, because they could be commenting that the rising anti-Semitism is just somebody saying free Palestine.
The ADL does that, actually.
And the ADL too. I've noticed that in Ventura County.
Yeah.
So do you have any insight into that?
I'm happy to take on that question. I think we're really proud of the partnerships we have. My volunteer role with IfNotNow LA is to help with the partnerships team, doing the outreach and and building the partnerships and relationships. So we're really proud of the way we've built partnerships, both before October 7th and since, with different organizations throughout Southern California, but especially Palestinian and Arab and Muslim folks. I also would say that we're still growing in that regard, right? So a lot of that was in place before October 7th. A lot of it has grown since, and we're still developing those. And to say very specifically about a geography where it's developing is in Orange County. Of course, in Orange County, there is a very rooted and historical Palestinian community and broader Arab and Muslim communities. Diedra and I are both part of a group called Rad Jews of Orange County, which is adjacent to IfNotNow, but folks in Orange County who have been organizing, and even folks in IfNotNow who are based in LA in October and November especially came down to Orange County to be in solidarity with a lot of actions. For example, to your question about city council advocacy and board of supervisor advocacy, for all the city council turnouts that have been happening in Orange County cities, but also actions that happened to ask Katie Porter, who of course is a representative who's also running for Senate, to call for a ceasefire. And just those actions and the way that we were able to be in solidarity with Palestinian folks especially was just so moving. We did a sit-in, not a civil disobedience, but a sit-in that anyone's allowed to do at Katie Porter's office back, I think it was October still. And we read the names of, at that point was, I think about 10,000. We had this long list of 10,000 Palestinians who had been killed. Of course, now it's more than 20,000, I believe, right? And we read all day, we read the names, and it just was so emotional. Like people were crying, Jewish folks were reading them, Muslim folks and other folks were reading them. And the way that we were just able to be present with them, like we have this strategy of like moving the Jewish community, but when we're able to be in solidarity with directly impacted folks, like it's just so powerful. I would say, just to make sure I heard your question, Palestinian organizers in America have their strategy. Like they are taking leadership. Like they are courageous. They're brave. They're so many things. They know their strategy. So like they don't need to get it from us per se, but we have our strategy within the Jewish community, and we also show up in solidarity with them when we can. So I'm just really proud of that.
Yeah, the our tactics differ sometimes, but it's because our audiences are different. You know, shout out to all of the organizations that are mobilizing people. Like, you know, you've got Palestinian Youth Movement. They're out in the street every weekend, thousands of people in the street. You have us who are mobilizing our own community because the way that we are working, we're trying to get our own house in order before we can, you know, do some of the other work that we want to do. Because we have those differing tactics, it allows us to broaden the movement. It allows us more people to mobilize. And it is extremely powerful and hopeful when we show up in solidarity for each other. When the Islamic Center hosted us, they hosted a Shabbat event for If Not Now a few months ago. That meant more to me than possibly any other action that I have participated in, because those open doors told me that they had open hearts. And being able to sit in a place with people where you're just being humans, you're just being people with lives, you have families, you have jobs, you want safety, security, food, shelter. It was the ultimate human connection. And when I go to, you know, a rally, or if I'm at a march or a sit-in, when I see my fellow Latinos, when I see Chicanos, when I see Filipinos, I see them and I go, we're all in the same struggle. We're all dealing with the repercussions of colonization. We're all dealing with the feeling of not being safe in your authentic self, you know. Matthew was discussing a little bit about this in his own family history, but Jews were not considered white, even in countries where we would say are, quote, white countries. The same happened to immigrants from Italy, say. They would come over to America and they wouldn't be considered, you know, quote, white. I have a census from like 1910, 1920, where my toasty brown, I've got photos of my ancestors that just came across from Chihuahua, and they're listed ethnically as white because there were laws in the American system that prevented non-white immigrants. So you could look at someone who is 5 shades darker than me being listed as white because their identity is being dictated to them rather than them expressing it. So being in these coalitions, it not only gives us the ability to be who we are, but it allows more people to be courageous in who they are. And we're standing with them because all of our struggles are intertwined. We can't be free until Palestinians are free. They can't be free until we're free. We can't achieve these liberation goals without each other. And hey, if our tactics are different, cool. We're all working towards the same goal. We're all heading towards that finish line. Does that answer your question? I kind of got off on
Okay. We have 19 minutes left until we close out completely, and the Q&A will have to end before then. So I'd like to call on Michael Novick.
Yeah, as I said, I was formerly participating in If Not Now, and haven't been able to for a while. I did come to at least part of the Hanukkah for a ceasefire outside City Hall. Part of what attracted me to If Not Now even though I've defined myself as an anti-Zionist Jew since the 60s, is that it's a very embracing and inclusive and welcoming organization. And I appreciated actually that agnosticism around Zionism in a sense, because it allowed people to come in and dialogue. And I think one of the really important aspects was, even before, as you say, the sort of reconstitution, was that it identified Black, Indigenous, Jews of color, Sephardi, Mizrahi, as because growing up, I experienced that within my father's of immediate Jewish descent. He came, I'm sorry, immediate European. He came here. My father came here from Poland in the 30s. So I had that sense of being a European Jew in a very immediate way. And as I was growing up, there was a lot of discrimination within that community against Yemeni Jews, Syrian Jews, Israeli Jews who were coming here and were looked down upon for leaving Israel and all of that. So the other thing that attracted me, and I wish we would have talked about it a little more, was the strategy of looking at different pillars of the occupation, and particularly the one most relevant to us being the support of the U.S. Jewish community for that, and for and I see that in the labor movement too. I was part of like BDS, and we had to try to have a discussion in United Teachers Los Angeles years ago about not even to say the union should take a position, but just to have a meeting at the union hall. And the Jewish Labor Committee and the International Zionist Movement came down on UTLA with like a ton of bricks to say you can't have that, and they changed the rules within the union as a result. So, I just think that if you could say a little bit more about that idea of like trying to sort of undermine the authority of the ADL and the Jewish Federation, and trying to basically support imperialism and the occupation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think our strategy is really a big part of like what makes IfNotNow's like presence and visibility like so impactful. The strategy we have in the Jewish community, as you named, and I'm so grateful that you've been part of our movement, so that you could reference these things. So, indeed, that's probably like a whole other slideshow we could share. But like, IfNotNow views like our most likely way that we could actually like make a change, actually have an impact, is by moving the Jewish community to stop supporting occupation and apartheid, and also to, in this context, to call for a ceasefire, and to stop funding, and that's another demand, right? To stop funding like U.S. military aid to Israel because of what happens with that military aid. And so, as you mentioned, we know that organizations, especially AIPAC, AIPAC has been a campaign focus for ours for probably at least a year, and it's going to be this year. That AIPAC, for example, often speaks as a Jewish communal organization, but in who they endorse, in their strategy, they very clearly do not have the interests of like the Jewish community at heart. Because number one, they endorse like all these right-wing Republicans who like supported the insurrection on January 6th, for example. Like they'll endorse anyone if they toe the line about Israel that they want. And we know that like that kind of like white nationalism, that far-right politics, does not make Jews safe. So we know that AIPAC is not protecting the interests of the American Jewish community. It's advocating for a state whose actions we sometimes find to be problematic. So part of our strategy is, as you named, like, for example, there's the stop ADL campaign, which IfNotNow was a part of, but also like with AIPAC, like being this alternative voice of like, this is not what you advocate for, is not what's going to keep the American Jewish community safe or Israeli safe, but like only solidarity and like equity will. That is exactly how we try to make change in the Jewish community and within America. And to the extent in which October 7th shifted the dynamic so much, in that so much of the focus is on the number one priority of demanding a ceasefire. We know that we can juggle things at once, right? We can do two things at once or many things at once. So we're going to continue to advocate for a ceasefire this year, but also and take action in all these amazing ways, but also continue to do that sort of strategic and communal work that Michael, you mentioned. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, the funding is a really big issue right now. Like you'll see a lot of people blocking like Biden motorcades or speaking out at his fundraising events. Because if America wasn't paying for the bullets and the weapons, it would absolutely rip the rug out from the aggressive military actions that are happening right now. Largely, America is supporting the Israeli military's ability to be violent and to kill, civilians en masse. So taking away that piece, that pillar of support for the apartheid system and the occupation and the militarism, that is a huge focus for us. And that in turn is empowered by our leaders who fund AIPAC. And AIPAC is overwhelmingly financially supported by Christian Zionists. And the number of Christian Zionists in America outnumbers the Jews worldwide. So this is being propped up ostensibly on our behalf, but overwhelmingly not by Jews as a community. So when we're addressing these issues, they're so meshed together. The idea of Christian nationalism, but also AIPAC playing off of that. So when we're doing this work, especially going into an election year, we're going to be addressing AIPAC specifically, as well as some of the other financial pillars that are supporting this violence and this militarism, because ceasefire, again, is just the first step. It's not the last one. We want the killing to stop as soon as possible so that we can get aid in and then also discuss, hey, militarism isn't the way forward. We need to figure out a way that we can actually live safely together without doing exactly what we're doing right now. And that's why we're targeting, city council meetings. Politics is local, as they say. We're in city council meetings. We're disrupting financial, fundraisers. We're doing all of these things because we're trying to say, hey, money, it's money, it's money. Stop funding it. Stop funding the war machine. You'll hear those chants a lot, at a lot of the rallies and stuff. So it's a lot. We're getting there, but you'll start seeing a lot more targeted focus on things like AIPAC as we go into this campaign cycle. And hopefully we erode that support.
Thank you. I'm next on the stack. So I would like to ask a question about Israelism, the movie that you mentioned earlier. And
love it.
Pardon me? Yes.
Love it.
Now I'm looking at a gallery. I just want to see if there are any, raise your hand if you have seen Israelism. Okay, so no one except just the three of us so far. I strongly recommend that friends of ICUJP see that film. I think it's very effective. My question has to do with how the film can be promoted and advertised to as many people as possible. And one of the avenues is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and many, many documentary films every year submit their films to the Academy for consideration for nomination and eventually for election as the best documentary of the year. So I'm a member of the Academy, and we are all allowed to stream movies from 2023, for consideration. We can view many, many films, hundreds of films. And I could not find Israelism as a submission for consideration.
Yeah, I don't think it was submitted.
Now, so thank you for letting, that's good information. Now, is there a thought of submitting the film for 2024?
That's probably something that the filmmakers have looked at. I don't know if that's obviously the submission deadlines happened, some time ago, but they might have a different tack in mind. So that might be a better question for like Simone and some of the other people involved in creating it. I'm not privy to their specific outlook on that. I would love it if they submitted it because it's just so good.
Yeah.
If I were to pitch it to somebody, I would say, hey, this is about, a Jewish person who has only grown up with one half of the story, and as soon as they met, a Palestinian and learned the other half, they realized, oh wait, this is not okay. And going on, I think I don't remember the exact phrasing, but once she goes beyond the wall that separates, Israel from the West Bank or Israel from Gaza, she realizes the conditions there are not what she was told. And yeah, it's such a moving journey. It was so powerful. Like, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it is a wonderful film. We're coming up to the end. Steve Rohde, one last question.
Yes, and as we begin to wrap up, so two things in terms of activism. ICUJP has, the board has approved a resolution to the LA City Council calling for a ceasefire. Offline, I'd like to talk to both of you. We've got Cynthia Anderson Barker and Jim Lafferty and others involved in locating a city council member who will sponsor that resolution. So let me talk with both of you offline about getting us lined up for that. Which brings me to my embarrassment that ICUJP's logo was not among your co-supporters when you did your slideshow.
Hey, we can change it.
I am hereby convening a special meeting of the board of directors of ICUJP. We have sufficient members on the screen of our board. And I would entertain a motion for ICUJP to become a co-sponsor of the very closely aligned work of IfNotNow with our principles and our approach. So I'll entertain, this is just among board members for a moment.
I so move.
Dave
I
moved.
second.
Anthony seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, hands up. I see hands. Any against? Any abstentions? I see Maggie came on to say aye. It passes. So Rick will get in touch with you with our logo and our official endorsement. We really respect and admire what you're doing personally and through IfNotNow. So please see us as a partner standing shoulder to shoulder with you in this work. And by becoming a co-sponsor, I just was tardy and signed up to your newsletter and your work. And thank you. You've got each about 1 minute if you want to just close with a few remarks.
Matthew?
Well,
Diedra?
I am just so honored. This is my third time presenting to you all, and I should make it a habit to just come every week as and to see the different presentations. But in this role of If Not Now, like really excited. Like we shared, like October 7th and everything that's happened since then, of course, is so terrible, such a point of suffering. But some of the silver linings in our work at If Not Now has been really this intention and this growth in our coalition building, our partnerships, and we are building that out and just like building different relationships. And I'm really grateful that we're going to be able to continue to collaborate with ICUJP. And of course, I'll be in touch about the Clue work too, I'm sure. And so thank you for giving space to like these difficult conversations, and especially this perspective on, bijoxum like leadership. And I really look forward to folks watching the video who weren't able to join. Diedra.
It means a lot to me personally to see interfaith communities standing and doing this work. It gives me hope because it is an acknowledgement that the way things were in the past is not the way that they have to be. And as cliche as it sounds sometimes, a better world is possible. And I truly, truly believe that with my heart. And the only way to make that happen is together. And having this group here specifically inviting us into your space is very meaningful to me, and I'm very grateful that you did that. And I encourage you to keep going forward, to inviting more voices, more speakers to do the work that you're doing, because we can and will make this a better world together. And I hope that no matter your leanings or your affiliations or your identities, that you have a beautiful, wonderful, restful weekend and stay safe and rested. And may we all experience the freedom that we're working towards.